Welcome to another episode of the Mastering the Game of Allyship podcast. I am very happy to introduce all of you to my dear friend, ally, former client, just collaborator par excellence, Sonya, Emerick. And before we started recording, we were having, sort of a level setting conversation. And while we were doing it, we both sort of recognized, like, oh shoot, this is the allyship thing. This should have been on the recording. But this sort of, I watch a lot of Kung Fu movies. And even last night we did the first dojo of 2023. The reason I chose this metaphor is that in the Chinese martial art tradition, there is a deeply respectful type of conflict that happens all the time. You'll see two masters roll up on each other and then exchange blows to set each other's chops and be like, ah, yes, so you studied with Master Chin. And it's like, ah, yes. And then they respectfully bow and then they go drink tea. And we had this lovely boundary setting thing where it was like, oh, I'm going to push back. Oh, I'm going to push back. And then a laugh. And they were like, okay, let's go do the thing. And it's beautiful because I do sense in my own journey through allyship that it is one of the most beautiful parts about effective allyship is also the thing that people are the most afraid of, which is that healthy conflict space. Having said all of that, I wanted Sonya on because they know so much about my work. They've seen me through many different iterations of it. They've gone through, in my personal opinion, not to blow smoke up your ass, one of the largest, most allyship transformations. And it's still happening. In the words of the sage, the hits start coming and they don't stop coming. So it's very exciting to see your journey unfold. And so I wanted to give you space to introduce yourself to my audience formally. Sonya, who are you? What are you about? What does allyship mean to you? Have at.
Yeah, I'm a parent. That's like the big one for me because I've been a parent for like 20 years, my whole adult life. And I am a Minneapolitan, lifelong resident of Minneapolis. And I've been organizing here for 25 years. And I am, queer and I am disabled and I'm white. And I am a newly elected member of the Minneapolis School Board. So that's been my project of late. I was elected in November and just took my oath of office last week. Wow, a lot has happened since then. But that's sort of my little bit of background information. But I, as an ally and regarding allyship, I have to actually go back to, so when I first got to know who Wendell was, it was doing Allyship Dojo, I don't know, a year, maybe more ago. And I think the first live class that I was in, you were like, two things define allyship. What are they? And like nobody could name them, but you're like such a great teacher that every sort of idea that folks threw out, you were like, that's such a good idea. And here's why, like, this is why your contribution is so good. Right. And then when nobody got it, you were like, okay, here it is. And you basically said allyship has to be measurable and it has to be a provision of service. So you have to be able to say, like, this is what I did. This is how I'm tracking it. There has to be some sort of metric for, what you did. And then it has to have actually helped somebody. And I was blown away because I'd not ever heard allyship sort of framed like that, even though it immediately made all the sense to me. And so I've sort of kept that and held that it's distinct from self-development and education. It's from, trying something and having it not connect, right? Like there's these sort of development. I remember you said these things are like sharpening your knife, right? Like there's these pieces that can like get you ready, but they're not allyship. They're not the same as allyship. They're for you. And so, I mean, maybe you're being an ally to yourself and then you can track that and you know what I mean? Anyway, so
is a big distinction is the prep work so that you're an ally to yourself as you're an ally to others has emerged in the last year as something that felt obvious to me, but that I wasn't saying. It was too embedded in what I was about, and then letting that be two distinct steps and letting people sort of see that, like, okay, cool, you're testing your own sharpness but then you've got to test the sharpness in the outer world. And so that's a cool reflection. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, well, I remember in a coaching session, there was a time when we were sort of thinking about like what actionable steps, like when I wanted to sort of like schedule and track my actionable allyship. And one of the things that came up was that I might need to spend a certain amount of time researching, but that, with a specific purpose and sort of like as part of my sort of schema of my allyship, that became trackable and it became specific. And I needed to research eventually to learn how to run for office. And I needed to research to learn how people, strategize for campaigns. And I needed, so this type of research did become like an actionable tool for me towards a specific measurable goal. But, I think the other thing that I think about though, is I think that folks get like real scared when it's like, you have to track it, you have to measure it, you have to come up with a rubric to figure it, because I don't think we have expansive enough ideas about what tracking data looks like. But I remember, look, there was a time when you said, I don't have to find it in the notebook because I can basically remember to paraphrase, you were like, figure out what being effective feels like for you, and then track that feeling. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that there's so many more expansive ways to figure out, like, am I being successful at what I'm setting out to do and how can I tell? Than just like sort of your traditional, quantitative data. Like that might be the one for you, but maybe that's not the one. Maybe there's a more qualitative or less traditional metric that you're going to use. And then that's one of my favorite things, because I really like different ways to look at data.
Well, I appreciate that, because it also speaks to sort of essentially an educational trauma that kind of emerges. Like I do say this to people, you're going to play a game, and if we're doing this thing called mastering the game of allyship, the effectiveness matters so that you know when you're winning. When you're playing tag, you know if you're winning. When you're playing hide and seek, you know if you're winning. When you're playing Tetris, you know if you're winning. You're playing Pokemon, you know if you're winning. And there are these tiny metrics that you can track, but they're also designed to sort of be fun. And I do think when you move people into that tracking, goal setting mode, which is a personal development practice, it's one of the most fundamental ones. It's a showing up practice. The inner critic that shows up feels like this sort of self-grader, this mean teacher. And so if people don't track their stuff, they don't ever have to confront the mean teacher that's going to be like, great, you tracked it, and now you've got an F, and you're bad because you got the F. And that's one of the reframes where it's like, well, you still have to track it, but it's more like a pilot, like where it's like, okay, cool, you're trying to get from Wichita to Cincinnati via plane. There's going to be micro adjustments. You don't get an F for being off track, but you still do need to know how off track you are. And you have to hold the self-trust that you are able to get back into whatever the path is. I say, I think 99% of the time that a plane is in the air, it's off course. The pilot's job and the autopilot's job is to sort of correct that. But the added flavor is the best pilots are going to be the people who like doing the course correction. Piloting isn't hop the plane, be perfect. Piloting is the, like, I'm just imagining because I'm not a pilot, but if you don't like the act of turning the wheel to shift it, you're going to be a very neurotic pilot, at least at the best. Maybe you're still successful at it, but you're going to, every time you get in the air, you're going to be like, the one thing I know I'm going to have to do every single time sucks. So in starting with that feeling and then moving to the quantitative, you know that now the only thing that you're going to be tracking is experiences of you being engaged. And I remember when we were working together, and it's already borne out, and it looks like it's going to bear out again as you're doing research about what quality research is in this position of power. I remember you were someone who loved to do research and were similar to me, where like, I'm always reading. I got these piles of books everywhere, but it wasn't until I made a practice of reading that my reading became sort of effective. Like when I wake up every day, most days, I got a stack of books and I read one chapter each, and I try to get through all the books, and then I stop. And over time, I get through more books than when I reactively go into research mode because I'm trying to ameliorate a feeling. Instead, it's like, no, I generate this feeling of joy reading. I need to make sure I pay myself in that off the jump, so that then when the ideas that I need to pull out from the stuff that I've read, I'm moving into my joyful brain to record that knowledge instead of into my stressed out reactive brain to pull out the knowledge. And so then people, thankfully, hopefully, I think, are more receptive to taking it in because they can feel it off of me that's like, oh, he's giving me this information not out of the fear mongering style, which can tend to happen. It's like, did you know? Did you hear? Did you read? Did you do the thing? Which a lot of research will sort of come. And so then when you know that you've got that sort of sacred time, that set aside time when you're doing it consciously, anytime that you do afterwards, it's easier to sort of see like, well, why am I doing this? I've already done the amount that I was supposed to do. What's this extra piece happening? And I'm actually very curious. I don't really know. How have you seen your relationship to research change through being more conscious about it? And I bring this up just because I do think in a good chunk of my dojos back in the day, if there was advice I was giving, it was pretty strongly for people to stop researching things. And then you're like, wait, I like this. And say, okay, let's figure it out. And it was more that people were doing that reactive researching, consuming to like feel okay versus leveraging their superpower. And when I realized that this was your superpower, I was like, dope. But because it's research, I don't actually get to see where that happens. So like, what did it look like to sort of sit in that space, in that superpower, be concerned about it? And how has that sort of shifted your life?
Well, I think I'll answer that, but I want to actually go back for a second to some things that I was thinking about because of what you were saying about the tracking. And like I think that there's the first thing that I thought of was like how allyship is so often a performance. And when if your allyship practice, I'm doing air quotes, is a performance, then like if you do something quote unquote wrong, right? Like it hits harder, right? Like that fear of like
tomatoes at you. You do the performance.
Yeah. So like, instead of like being able to frame it as like a course correction, right? Where it's like, this is part of like the natural, way of progressing towards a goal, you're like, I can't screw up. I don't want anyone to see it. And, I think that's one of the costs of, allyship being a performance. And then, when you were talking about like tracking that joyful feeling, I think that that's something that's so different about the way that you present these concepts, right? Is that like, there are a lot of folks who think that like you can track your effectiveness in allyship by like how bad you feel about yourself, how guilty you feel, right? And like you were the first person who was like, yeah, that's not effective because if you aren't having a good time, you're not going to keep showing up. Like that's not how human beings work. So if we want an effective allyship practice, like it should feel good, right? It should feel joyful or it should feel satisfying or, like you should be able to be like, yeah, I had an impact. That feels great. And so, thinking about like how that you said at one point in time, and this is like another one of those things that just like stuck with me that I re-reference all the time and have shared with other folks. You said that one of the like sort of gifts of like having a specific goal that you're tracking your progress towards, right? Is that like other people don't know what your goal is. Like, I mean, unless you've like explicitly told them, like they don't know. So folks might have a judgment or a critique of your allyship or your practice, but they don't actually have enough information to judge or critique your path towards your goal because they don't know what your goal is, right? So you were like, you can like kind of take it or leave it. You could consider that there might be something useful there. If it is, go ahead and take it, but like you don't have to because they don't have enough information. So it doesn't like say they're bad or you're bad. It's just like they don't have the information that, is needed. So I think that's like something when I'm feeling a little like, that little like squeeze of like, oh no, what if I screwed up and somebody saw it and I'm, what are they going to think of me? I'm like, this just not course correct. They don't have enough information, but I have enough information, right? To look at what am I trying to do? How am I doing? Right? And do I need to make any course corrections to be doing a better job at what I'm trying to accomplish? Could I be more effective? And like when that becomes the focus of how like I interact with my own effectiveness and my own allyship practice, then that was like the big change for me because I was like, I'm not looking externally anymore. As far as your question about research that I want to come back to, I think the cool thing is that once I started making research more of a practice, what I really realized, like it did not take long at all for like that to be a springboard to the next level for me, which is that the reason that I love researching so much is because I really like to be in relationship with other people around the concepts that are interesting to me to research. Like there's like your very typical autistic person, right? Where like I want to know cool stuff, and then I want to find people who want to talk to me about the cool stuff that I learned. And so what I found was that having that sort of base of information and research coming in that were, you know, interesting to me and topical to the work that I'm doing out in the world with other folks, like that was my in the door to be with other people out doing the work. And that continues then to be a cycle. Like I collect more information, I take it out and I share it with folks, I hear back from them, and that informs what I want to research next. And like that's a practice where I can be really effective, and that's my superpower. Like that's it right there, encapsulated. So
well, I want to reflect a number of beautiful things you said, not just about me, even though, oh my God, that's so great. One of the distilled versions of, I think, what you were talking about is some rules and boundaries that I've sort of made for myself in my allyship. First one is, I don't take advice from people whose lives I don't want. I think that's someone everyone should have. You don't have to. Again, if you don't like my life, don't take my advice. And to be very wary of advice that comes from the stands and not in the game. And so I think that's one of the big things in the frame of mastering the game of allyship. People who are next to me into the game, giving me sort of feedback and are aligned with my goals because they're on the same team. That's one of the ways when you know you're on the same team is that you have aligned goals, versus a devoted, even caring fan who's very excited about me like growing, but not knowing my trajectory. As the player, I'm the one who has to take responsibility for that. The fan actually needs me to set that boundary, because when I don't listen to them, that's when they start realizing, why are they listening to me? It's like, oh, I'm screaming at them from the stands. I'm not at close enough distance to be able to be effective. Some of people's first forays into effective allyship is this advice-giving mode. I see it all the time in the internet. It's the thing that got me so weary that made me even take this approach. It happened to me for the first time. I've been making these YouTube videos and being more consistent than I've been in a very long time. And I get my first YouTube comment, and someone is like, there is a flaw in your premise. Answer me these 3 questions. And I felt the clutch inside myself, like, okay, here's my opportunity to like show this person that I know. And then even as I was doing that, I was like, I know who this person is, and they're too far away, and they actually haven't demonstrated in any capacity that they are curious or wanting to know about stuff. They're actually just making demands of me for something in them that I don't know about, and that they're too far away to sort of deal with. This might have all happened in like 5 minutes, and I was like, I'm done. I'm actually going to do anything. And it's wild, because this is one of my biggest fears of being like a public person, is that everyone was going to ask me to prove that my approach was right or that they should listen to me. And it's funny because this used to happen to me when I worked at the Apple Store, but it was easier for me to deal with it then because I don't identify myself as having the prestige of a building like an Apple Store. But I had a dude come into me, several dudes, it's always been for some reason, we don't need to get into that, that would come into the Apple Store and be like, tell me why I should get one of these Apple computers. And I, even at like 20 something years old, was just like, my brother in Christ, you're already in the Apple Store. Like, I'm not going to do that. Like, I can tell you why they're dope. I can tell you why they're all amazing, but you're the one who drove however many miles to come to the Apple Store to justify its own existence. I was just like, the fact that we're paying rent every day is justifying of the existence. And for the first time, I had that experience with my own work, where someone's coming to my YouTube channel telling me why I should be on YouTube. And I'm like, I don't know, my dude, maybe make a YouTube video about why you think I should. But there is this level of engagement that would have been meaningful, and that I'm allowed to hold that boundary for it. Using like your metaphor around the performance, this person basically came as like an art critic and was like, this art is bad. And I was just like, okay, I guess you're not one of my people. And in invalidating themselves, immediately I didn't have to worry about them. The people for whom I care for, they do have to take meaningful steps and signify that they're going to be ready and willing to be on the path. And I make this content as a qualifier. And there is this tension between wanting to be inclusive and accessible for sort of everyone in allyship and being effective. Like, that tension never goes away. You're usually going to be a smaller set of people. And yet, to get access to that smaller set of people, you got to put yourself in front of a lot of crazy people, which is what I kind of want to go to you. Like, how was that experience campaigning? Like, I don't want to be dramatic about this or tell your story in a way, but just from my perspective, the transformation of being a disabled autistic parent in almost an agoraphobic situation to being like an expensive politician leader of people. It's Hollywood shit. It's like, wow, that's a fucking journey. How did that tension show up in your journey where you were recognizing, okay, who are my people as I am choosing to serve all people?
Yeah, it is wild because even before the pandemic, because of the nature of my disabilities, I did not leave my home very frequently for many, many years, like maybe once or twice a month. And then of course in the pandemic, folks started leaving their home less frequently if they were lucky enough to be able to make that choice. And so it was kind of more of the same for me. So I have lived sort of in that stay at home space for so long. And then, it was like this was this pivotal moment for me, right? Like I had recently gotten sober. I had just the previous year, for the first time in 25 years of medical care, found a medication that was really helping me, a prescription medication. I had recently decided to get on gender affirming hormones, and I was in the midst of trying to advocate for my own kid in the school system and deciding via social media to kind of let folks into that process, because advocating in special education is this sort of like siloed experience that only folks who are doing it even know anything about. And I was realizing that like you can't show up as an ally, right? Like if I want folks to ally with me and my kid and my experience, right? Like folks can't even like consider whether that might be something that works well for them if they don't know that there's a need for allyship in this area, right? So like without any demand or expectation, like what if I just start sort of sharing more widely the narratives of like what our life is like in trying to do this, and found that like folks did want to ally. Like folks were like, this is compelling to me. This is interesting to me. I had no idea what's going on. What can I do? Like local grassroots organizations started reaching out. Like, can you come to our meeting virtually? Can you talk to folks? Can you present? Can you consult? And it was really sort of stunning to see my local sort of education advocacy community be like, dang, we've been leaving special education out of all of our advocacy. I can't believe we did it. How can we correct it? Can you help? So from there, but I was able to do like all of that virtually from my house, right? And then when this, it came, the filing period for the school board election was open in the spring last year. So they came to me and they were like, run, and I was like, I can't do that. Like, and there was basically like conversations that went both between me and like community members who were, asking me to run, and between like I received disability services from a few places. So I'm systems involved in that way. And so I needed to like go up the chain and hear from folks about like, what are the parameters in terms of doing something like running for office? How does that interact with continuing to access like the material support that I get through Medicaid and through, public housing authority and stuff like that? Like, cause I can't endanger those services, and that is a consideration. And so once there was a conversation that went for weeks and weeks, sort of like, what if I decide to do this, what am I working with? And I found out that the system stuff, the material support, the disability services was going to be okay because of the specific way that I access services and where I live and how that looks. But like the real consideration in there is like, do I have people who are going to show up, who are reliable, trustworthy allies to like support this whole process? And that was the relationship building that happened in the beginning. The first several months of my campaign was largely about that. So when you think about political campaigns, right? Like, I'm not sure very many people are thinking like, yep. And the first part is like the deep embodied relationship building, you know what I mean? But we had to do it because I was like, it was very clear to the people who were supporting me as allies that like it was not in any way easy for me to trust that they would continue showing up. And like they had the skill to be able to understand that like how they could be effective was to demonstrate and also very clearly and directly communicate to me. Like I had somebody say to me literally, like, there is not a thing that you are going to do that is going to make us abandon you and stop supporting you. Like if you are worried about that, you can just stop. You know what I mean? Like,
I wish I could say I know what you mean. Truly, that is, I want to create space for that because that's beautiful. Like that is at a certain level. I've been doing some jamming on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I do think a lot of allies want to show up at the, we'll call it the free level. There's a paradox in our world in which some of the higher level needs are actually free. Belonging, esteem, recognition. The act of doing that costs nothing, but it's harder to receive those when the bottom isn't there. And so many allies don't want to get responsible for that bottom because it might mess up their own esteem needs and whatnot. And so to get that affirmation of, we're here, we're ride or die, is very powerful. Now, to get someone to that transformation space takes time, energy. You've been doing that work before they even asked you to run. And it sounds almost even like as you're in the early phases, you were learning about the decisions that they had already made before they had told you, like, do this thing. And it's a powerful stage. I'm tempted to say I want all allies to get to that space, to have ride or die people, that's a really useful moment to get to. But you don't always have that. And sometimes even once you do have the bottom taken care of, now you get to play the free game of esteem and belonging and stuff. And that, even though it is monetarily free, you start actually realizing at those higher levels, there are emotional costs, even philosophical costs. We are Midwesterners. I love the Midwest. It's fantastic, but they will do some really weird stuff about basically gassing people up. They just won't. And not because they do not think you are great, but because, oh, it'd be weird and I don't want to mess up your humility game by telling you you're so amazing. It's like, well, some days I just need to actually feel amazing. And are you willing to overcome your programming to do that? Like allyship practice culturally for Midwesterners is, how do you do coastal dope shit energy? Because that's the one thing that we don't necessarily have in this space. And that all happens after people have already committed to being with you on the path. And so that's just a really cool thing to hear that I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, I think like, well, I want to, like, you're saying that and I'm reflecting that like the person who is sort of like at the core, who is still like my biggest supporter in this work that I'm doing from Atlanta, like, and spent time living in DC and has only been here in the Midwest for like 10 years. So like that's coming. I'm like, you're such a good cheerleader. That's coming together for me more now. Thanks for that.
It's real. My people are from Atlanta, and then I moved to Wichita, and then I moved to the West Coast, which I'd had in my brain I thought would be more of a gas up place, but the West Coast sometimes is worse about that, gassing people up, than even like the Midwest. Midwest will sometimes create champions and be like, great, you're gonna be the heroes so that we all can stay like humble. And in the West Coast, they're like, no heroes, no guys, no masters. So now we're all anxious and depressed of not doing stuff. And only sociopaths rise to the top. There is the aspect, even though we dog the East Coast, that sense of self, that sort of healthy American ego, like that's an East Coast thing. That's that New York, I walk in here of it all. And I'm like, we can move that sauce to other places. We can get other people to do that. And it's a beautiful allyship. I do find that some of my most vociferous vocal supporters, again, come from cultures in which that type of support is normal. And it's really just moving them into the spaces of lack that where their allyship gets to be most impactful.
Yeah, this was definitely like, and there was this symbiosis to it too, because, you know, like when, you know, some of these folks were like, we want to learn more about special education and disability justice, I was like, I'll teach you. Like, I will ally with you in your quest to better understand something that feels important to you, right? Like, let's hang out, I'll tell you what I know. And so there also wasn't that feeling of like saviorism. And I'm working hard too, right? Like not all allyship has to be like this at all, right? Sometimes you just give something to someone, you help them, and like that's that. It's, you know what I mean? But I think like this long game relationship that's really sort of fed me and like created the current version of me is really like, well, what if I also want the practice of you know, long-term sort of allyship community where, okay, so like you and I once in a coaching session, I was talking about how I was feeling guilty and even some shame. And I was thinking about how when I move, like I'm a renter, right? So, you know, I've moved in my adult life like a dozen times or whatever. And so moving is something I have some experience with. And how when it comes to figuring out where we're going to move, right? Like locating the new housing, securing the new housing, all of the paperwork, the documents, making the plan, like sort of designing the whole thing. You know, I'm really good at it, right? Like I have some really significant strengths in terms of like designing the high up trajectory of like, this is what we're going to do, why, when, you know what I mean? And what I'm terrible at is like the minutiae of packing the boxes and actually getting out the door. I am like the terrible friend who will like enlist folks to come help me move, and then they show up and like only half my stuff is packed, and I'm like, I don't know, you know, and they're like, Sonya, exactly, yeah. But I told you I had been feeling like guilt and shame, right? Because I was feeling like it doesn't matter like how rad and outstanding my strengths are, if I can't do every part of it perfectly, then like it's nothing, I'm nothing, right? And you were like, if you are really, really good at this part, you should do that part. Like you should be doing that part as much of the time as you can, and like get some box packers, like outsource the box packing. You know what I mean? Because there's somebody else out there who's really good at packing boxes, but gets completely overwhelmed by having to figure out where are we moving and what's the rent and can we afford it and the application and all, you know, obviously it's like a metaphor, but like just the idea that like I didn't have to feel bad because I'm not good at packing boxes. And instead, if I want to be effective, I should be like, who can I call? Who can I bring in to support me by packing boxes? And like, I remember telling you like a few months into campaigning, like I found my box packers.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And like, that's what I did. And, you know, I didn't feel badly about it because I'm working too, right? I'm not like sitting on my throne commanding everybody to go do the thing for me, right? Like I'm working really hard at the parts that I can be so effective at and that bring me joy. So I'm going to keep doing this work for a long time. And I found people who love packing boxes. Like they love it. They're very satisfied about it. I found people who love packing boxes and stacking them up and counting them and being like that's how they want to measure their work. They get joy from it. It like pumps them up. So, you know, that was just a different way to look at it, where I didn't feel bad about myself so I could be more effective.
Well, there's two things that emerged that's fantastic. And just as a review, because this is important, we're going to talk about the steps of allyship. So we talked about the superpower. You found your superpower, which is the high-level logistics of moving. You found the people that that's useful for. In this case, it's you, but as we're also seeing you show up as a school board member, almost certainly that skill is going to be happening too. So your personal life and currently the Minneapolis public school system are the people that you help. Now, the people that you enrolled to help you have very specific things that you're enrolling them for. You're enrolling them for the box packing. You're like, well, I don't actually like to do this, or I'm not good at it, or what have you. I want to put a brief moment here to jump back. It's like, it would also be okay. You wouldn't have to feel bad if you did want to sit on a throne and got a bunch of people who were satisfied at their job to do the thing. The key is the satisfaction. The thing that we get annoyed about is when people are sitting on a throne cracking whips to make people who don't want to do stuff do things. But if you got, like, it's the Tom Sawyer of it all. You get people hyped about painting fences, you don't also have to then pay like an amount of sort of suffering to do that. There's some people whose skills is just moving people around, and on occasion they tend to get left out or end up being sociopathic politicians where they're like, well, this is the only skill I have, I might as well. And it's like, no, we can bring you into smaller things by putting more opportunities out there. That was just an aside. But that helping the helpers, there's a transformation moment that I guess you're reflecting to me happened in our coaching session, but I wanted to highlight it for people watching the podcast. To have those people help yourself, help you, if you recognize you need the box packers, you have to liberate the box packer inside of you and love them enough to give them work. And then you just put that work to the versions of them outside of you. So there needed to be, and maybe you found this out in relationship, maybe you found it out after the fact, but this is a very important process. To be in relationship with box packers, you have to acknowledge that it's possible for them to like the stuff that you don't like doing. And that's going to be really hard if you're beating yourself up for not doing it. You're not even going to be able to imagine that there's someone who could do it faster, better, joyfully than you if you're too busy spending time being terrible for yourself for that. Now, paradoxically, in the inner world, you might find that person. They're probably going to be very, very far away from you. There probably is spaces inside you, Sonya, where there's box packers, but they're either underdeveloped or they're too far away from the core of who you are. But your ability to care for that part of you translates directly in how well you're able to care for your box packers. And what it sounds like is you did it, even if you did it unconsciously. To be in a relationship with those people is to overcome that. And I say this because one of the quickest ways to find out how to be an effective ally is to receive effective allyship. And you're going to receive effective allyship on the stuff that you are bad at. And you're going to recognize the stuff you're bad at based on the things that you're ashamed about. So you actually do still need to start with the shame, but knowing that you can move through it, and that the end of the shame is letting go of responsibility for the thing that you probably have no business doing in the first place. And then being in a relationship with people who are strong there. The reason why a lot of people don't do that, and this is a conversation that I'd like to have because I think it's alive for both of us, is that some people experience shame for having people be better than them at things that they've pre-decided for basically no reason that they think they should be good at. And that's a big barrier for allyship. It comes up for me, and this is the transition I want to make, is when I'm expecting a certain allyship from people and it's not happening. When I'm like, hey, I need allyship, it's not happening. I think I've been clear about what are the things that I need, but the evidence that it's not happening is showing that I haven't actually found the people for whom has joy in doing it, has accepted that they have joy in doing it, or overcome the shame of being in that support role. But that the first sign that I'm in that quagmire is that feeling of lack, is that feeling of just like, honestly, healthy anger and frustration. So I'm curious, like, how that happens, because while you do have seemingly, from a narrative standpoint, a big old pile of successes, I know this allyship game keeps happening. Again, in the words of the sage, the hits starts coming and they don't stop coming, and you're always finding newer levels of where your edge is. And I'm also cheating. You did mention it before we started recording. So I'm like, hey, this is the time to talk about that.
Oh, yeah. So something that's interesting about being on the school board is that, and our school board in Minneapolis is large. It's larger than normal. It's nine members. And so in terms of a governing body, we only have power as a body of 9, right? Which means that individually, I'm actually not empowered to do much of anything at all. I mean, I can, do community engagement, and I can propose that we, bring topics or votes to the table, but I can't enact a policy or make a decision, right? And so, like, part of how allyship, I'm new in my role, and I'm trying to explore like what allyship looks like when I want to ally and have been asked to do so to, some entity in the community, an individual, a particular school building, or an administrator, or a family, or a student, whatever, and I need to figure out how to bring in my other 8 directors to like hear from me about, like why I want us to get on board, in allyship in this particular case, and so trying to figure out then, who are my folks, but also like, what do I do when I'm like, feel disappointed that somebody has a different perspective, different path, different priority, sees it differently. Like, how do I not experience feeling really disempowered? Because even though I'm like in this powerful, role, that power is limited, and it's very, very much intertwined with a lot of other folks' power. So like, kind of, what does allyship look like? Like, what are those mechanisms and levers, like when I have to follow certain policies and I have to work really closely with other folks. And that's just like the beginning of a new adventure for me right now, that I, need to sort of take the skills and like apply them in a different,
Yeah. I mean, that disappointment thing, I think is powerful. Like that's one of the things that I don't ever want to engineer out of anyone's effective allyship thing because it's the moment that tells you to course correct. So the question is really how much disappointment can you experience? How fast can you experience? And how much energy do you spend to get to the disappointment? What does this mean? Again, I studied Tai Chi under this guy named Bruce Francis. He does a water style. Water style, one of the founding principles is only spend 70% of your energy. If you hit disappointment at 70%, you can use temporarily that 30 to pivot. What a lot of the time people are doing in their allyship is they've spent 120% to get disappointment. And then they're just like, they collapse because what are you going to do? There's no energy in the tank to shift. I'd actually probably say if you can get disappointment at 10% energy, then you can go up to the next disappointment and immediately you start becoming the tenacious person that's like, dang, they keep coming back. I thought they were supposed to be literally discouraged by the disappointment. One of the main strategies for, I think, really strong systems with diffuse power is just that like the people who have the tenacity to keep pushing forward and keep trying things win, and those who don't fall in line and make sure that the bells and whistles and the T's are crossed and the I's dotted. And so there is always like a secret power game. What I hear in your situation that I find very fascinating is the skills that you've learned as a disabled person, and you were using spoon theory, just like you're probably already a very efficient person with your energy. Like you don't get your 70% isn't necessarily going to be the same as everyone's 70%.
Yep.
So your practice of being more efficient still has to interface in that though, because there's a feeling of cheating. This is something that I've sort of dealt with. There's an inner part of me that feels like a bully and I don't like that feeling. And really all they are is a tenacious person. There's someone who will knock on the door 7 times instead of the 3 that's customary. Knock, 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 knock. Okay, I'm done. I did it 3 times, I guess they're done. And versus knock, 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 knock. And if you stretch the metaphor, really it's like, actually, I'm gonna build a door knocking machine. And I'm just gonna have it sit there and I'm gonna go get a smoothie. And I'll come back and it'll knock as long as it needs to.
Is true disability justice wisdom right there, right?
But recognizing that like if the game of allyship is a technology, that you're remaking it in every space you sort of run into, and that there is this meta game of alignment that happens depending on how diffuse your power system is. You didn't ask this question, but I'm going to share it because it's a place where I learned this. This is a big thing that I learned in customer service. The customers are always right, so they're always giving us the feedback. But when I worked at companies like Apple, Airbnb, even at the animation studio and at the college, a lot of my job was also to purposefully protect the power system from the people who we were supposed to serve. And it always rankled me because I'd always try to like advocate for them really well. And eventually cause structural discomfortment in the people where I'm just like, hey, I hear your story. I hear your values. I'm reflecting them back to you. You're nodding accurately. Here's me showing how helping this person is doing this thing. For someone of integrity, to see that usually creates the necessary discomfortment so that we find a way to align. But as a Midwesterner, as someone who likes to be nice and is friend to all, creating circumstances that will cause that discomfort for people feels crazy. I know that someone is going to feel uncomfortable for me bringing, not just pushing against their alignment, but actually showing them exactly how they're acting out of alignment. I've done it enough times to know that people start swinging. The person that shows up to defend themselves in alignment isn't going to listen to me sort of well, so then I still have to have that tenacity game and still have to sort of go forward. The larger allyship strategy for that collectively does still seem to be a shame strategy. There is a lot of, oh, microaggressions, or oh my God, people aren't listening, or they're being like reactive. And so we shame the response, which I'm not even saying is like a bad idea. Like the response isn't effective. But we're trying to shame a response for someone who haven't enrolled into being effective. And that's the space where I think people have the biggest opportunity. When I worked at the Blue Sky Animation Studios, I remember the day when I was like, oh crap, I've been tasked with like helping these people and doing this employee engagement thing as a non-HR person. So I don't even have like the power to say, hey, you guys have to care about this because I'm on HR. And the solution that emerged, which I've done a couple times and I'll probably keep doing, was just set the goal to have 100 conversations. Like that was the ability to make the game. I have 100 conversations. I'll be able to start citing those conversations to people amongst the power holders. And I would always ask people, who should I talk to next about this? And I keep doing it until I'm just like, man, I got 8 people agreeing on this thing. Let's get them together and as a concerted unit, go after this problem. And sometimes those 100 conversations, even if it is, say, 9 people, it's great. What are the 10 conversations I'd have to have with all these people before I even have the data to demonstrate that I know and that they can see me having talked to them enough times to earn the trust and rapport for them to not just assume, and this is me putting myself in your situation, that I'm just some new hotshot trying to make a name for themselves. Like that, I think is probably the biggest institutional pushback is new person's coming in with shit to prove. Let's put up the defenses so they can become as jaded as we are. And your job to win that game is to not get to that state and to still probe the defenses at as tenacious as it takes to get people to actually see who you are and what you're about. And again, that takes time. It's the one thing that sometimes I see people being like, where's the shortcut? I'm like, I absolutely will not give you a shortcut. I will give you, in fact, a much longer path that's just slightly more fun to be on. The shortcut is honestly through self-abuse. Like if you can do something real crazy in a real short time, you might, trick someone into showing the weakness and exploit that, but you better do it before you run out of energy. Otherwise, you're going to utterly collapse. And so much of allyship has that collapse function in it. If someone wants to do big, dramatic, quick, against a very well fortressed foe, and the smooth path, which doesn't seem as dramatic, doesn't seem as interesting, doesn't seem as flashy, is the one that I really try to get people sort of into, because it's also the one that works over time. It's the Grand Canyon strategy. It's you got to be the water in the canyon and we just keep eroding the stuff until you've got a huge impact over time. And then there's a sort of long-winded about this, but there's also this thing that's been emerging for me recently called basically time magic. How can you affect people's experience of time? You can't actually change how much the clock ticks, but people have internal clocks that are totally different. Again, those 10 conversations, those 100 conversations collectively occupy a level of trust time units that while it might have only taken me a week to have 100 conversations, it would take someone else in the organization 7 years to have the conversation. So I've actually contracted time by doing something that takes more time, but that gives me the weight of experience that I wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to pull in that I think fits right here that we've been chatting about before is how I said I was grateful for embodiment as a liberation practice. And like when I'm thinking about like that experience of disappointment, which is a really embodied experience for me, right? Like I'm not choosing that up here cognitively, like, what could I feel right? Let's do disappointment. Right? Like that's something that like my body is taking me into that feeling. And, there's this TikTok channel or creator, I don't know what they're called, that I like called Gigi's Therapy World. And Gigi's Therapy World. And I had seen a TikTok that they had made a little bit ago where they were talking about this practice of like using the words, like saying the right things. The examples that they gave were like, I hear you, or like, I care about your perspective, or like those sorts of phrases. And she's like, here's the thing, folks can feel whether that's embodied for you or not, right? When you are like telling someone something that you're concerned about or something that you want them to hear or understand, right? They can say all those phrases back to you. Like they can be calm and they can be like, I hear you. Thank you. I'm paying attention to your perspective. I'm taking in what you're saying, right? You can feel in your body whether they are in their body when they are saying that, or whether those are just the words that they're saying. And then like, for those of us, I think, especially who have experience of marginalization across our life, where like we have folks say that all the time to us and they don't mean it, right? Like we have, well, I'll speak only for myself. I have an embodied response to that. Like that might be, like anger, or that might be like betrayal, or that might be disappointment, or that might be one that's been coming up for me, desperation. Ooh. Right? I know it's like, it's big. And so coming into that and like feeling that, coming in, naming it, right? And like for me, being able to like tell myself, number one, this is what you're feeling, I'm naming it, you know. Number two, it's completely reasonable and understandable that you are feeling this right now. Like that makes all the sense. And number three, like you did not do that. You did not take that person out of their body. You are not responsible for the fact that that person chose to come to you in their brain, not at all in their body. Whatever reason, that's what they're doing, whatever is controlling that for them, that is not on you. And you don't have to take on altering or changing your embodied experience of this interaction to take responsibility for the fact that they didn't show up with their own practice of embodiment. You know what I mean? And it's okay to be pissed off that they didn't. Like, I may not need to be pissed off at them, but like, you know.
Figure out, oh, there's so much here. And I'm feeling it in my body. It's fantastic. It's like a clown cart right here. So the first one is, you know, to affirm that, and it's this, there's a screenwriting thing, which is show, don't tell. It's ridiculous to have a character say, I love you. It's just like, have them kiss. What the hell are you talking about? The actions literally speak louder than words. It's gonna be like obvious through action what that is, but people don't trust their action. Again, words are cheap, in a not like disparaging way, but just if you've got a limited amount of energy, you're gonna use words over using the action, because again, if allyship is a performance, you're always trying to not get the tomatoes thrown at you. Paradoxically though, when people act, we'll call it in a disembodied way, which for me is out of integrity, that's the biggest opportunity. When in my body, when I was listening to what you're saying, I'm like, yeah, I feel that anger, I feel that betrayal, and immediately I'm just like, I'm picking the juiciest, meanest. I'm actually gonna stick a couple rocks in this tomato, and I'm gearing up to just chuck it at their face, because it does feel kind of manipulative. But there's a question that started to emerge. It's actually came to me after our coaching, so part of me wants to just like share it here because why not? And it really resonates with what you say, which is, what would have to be 100% true? What would have to be true for it to be 100% reasonable for me to have this feeling has been such a game changer, because it allows me to hold integrity for the feeling, but also immediately start seeing what expectations did I have for this person. And immediately once I see those two things, I can look at, okay, I'm having this expectation, but they're showing up here. Which one is reality? Always what they're showing up as is the reality. So it's like, great, I found their capability. And then there's two things that you said that I wanted to respond to. First off is just affirm that like to even do all of that in an embodied way requires your interior to be very large. If I use like a computer metaphor, you got a lot of RAM. You can run multiple programs at the same time. And honestly, you need to. First one is the what feeling am I having program. Then the name feeling program having. Then there's the holding perspective for other person's program. And then there's how do I integrate these things into one coherent whole. So much of what I try to do in the Mastering the Game of Allyship program is to increase people's capacity to do that, because even wanting to do that, most people's slots are so small that they're having to do this weird juggling game to even do it. And most of the loss of energy comes from the switching. Being the process is the powerful thing. So you got that piece. And so I just want to affirm the fact that to even hold that into awareness, that disappointment, and to like hold that stuff shows high level skill. But then here's where I'm coming with the challenge. You do have a choice to take that responsibility or not. I heard that very loud, which is say you don't have to. And also the big transformation comes from adding one more slot, which is letting someone in on that internal process. When you can then say, hey, I'm hearing that you're saying that you hear me. When you say that, I feel this thing because I have this expectation that looks like that. I'm recognizing that you aren't meeting that expectation, and I've never asked you if you wanted to do that. Would you like to meet that expectation? Here's the thing. That's definitely the look. That's definitely the Konami combo. You say that shit to anybody in any context, and having them already demonstrate they only have this much space, you're going to break their whole brain. It's the kindest, nicest thing to do that will immediately overwhelm them, because suddenly, what do they have to respond to? You accurately described my experience. You accurately described your own experience. You did it in a non-reactive way. What are they going to get mad about except for the fact that they recognize that you are a master and they're not? People don't like that. But it is the next stage. That is the responsibility taking. And so then you got to add another bit of presence, which is, and how chill can I be when someone acts real crazy? That the very kind, loving thing that I did all the push-ups for, is more threatening than just actually fighting them for not showing up how you wanted them to. I got no answers for that, but that has been something that has come alive for me that started making me feel like buck wild insane, where I'd be like, hold on, I'm the expert in the world. I've done all this. I've got the push-ups. I did the nonviolent communication thing perfectly inside my body, multi-perspective thing, held the perspective for the other person, like did it. And they're screaming louder than if I had slapped them literally from the face reactively. And it really sort of seeded how big this journey is for people, how getting practice with our loved ones is the best way to get that training, because they're the only ones that can see what it means for us to even change that approach. I've always been playing with the idea of like, if you can do your push-ups with the folk who are closest to you, who love you, who have capacity for holding, honestly, a lot of contradictions with you, and then test it out, test the new stuff out on the new folk. It wasn't until like, the last few months that, and seeing this kind of paradoxical reaction, there still was the engineer part of me that's like, and now that we've got the right answer, we'll hit run and everything will go great. And it does go great. I do get to get a new sense of my mastery, and the conversations and the conflicts even are more generative. They're spicier because people are even less prepared to be cared for in that way. It brings up a lot of.
So where's the effectiveness? So like, give me a layer of effectiveness on that.
A layer of effectiveness is you don't move out of stance. So that's the thing. The more that you can hold inside yourself, the more difficult it is for someone to pull you out of stance. And that's the big thing. If you can stay in stance, you don't lose your energy. Changing stances, like I said, changing postures is what loses energy for you. So you might just have to chalk up like, oh, that was a weird situation, but you always want to set people up for when they ruminate over a weird conflict that they have, the only thing they can do is look and see, would I have had them show up in any different way? And if the answer comes up to them, the only conversation you have next is exactly what they actually needed. Turns out you wanted to do that in one conversation. Effectiveness actually says, reality says you have to do it in two, and give them an experience of high integrity, because if you show up in not integrity, the ask that they're going to do is the very thing that you needed in the first place, which is to hold on that crazy shit.
Thanks for the education. That one is coming with me, like, to my next meeting right now.
Yes. I'm glad, just because you said something in our last session that was very beautiful and that I felt very bad about, which was, how am I going to deal with the loneliness that comes from like being an effective ally at this high level? And I was like, I got nothing for you. And it got crazier even after that zone where I was like, that disappointment in a lot of ways comes from the fact that like, when you step on the path of effective allyship, you become even more sensitive to the ways in which people don't care about it, or who have paid lip service to this but are actually doing it at a low level, or, and this is sort of built into the concept of effective allyship, are doing effective allyship at their level. They're not doing effective allyship. They're probably killing it better than the jamoke that they dunked on to get to their level, but now they got to deal with you. And again, we've talked about this a little bit, but I'll open up and be more explicit about it. The movie Nope came out, and no spoilers, but there's a weird sci-fi monster that like leaves a very interesting shadow in the world. Literally, like they could see it based on their shadow. And we do a lot of shadow work at Effective Allyship, Master the Game of Allyship. And what I've always known but haven't had reason to talk about, except now I do because this is the now cutting edge of allyship effectiveness, is people can't tell the difference between shadow that comes from someone at a higher level and shadow that comes from someone at a lower level. They have no idea. All they see is thing I don't like. They don't know how to echolocate. Oh, is this thing higher or is this thing lower? Not higher isn't better, but just coming from an altitude that can metabolize more complexity and stay in integrity. It's crazy making because it's essentially the alien problem. In the last podcast that I did with Arya Jockin, we talked about allyship alien. As you become a more effective ally, you're going to seem less human to people, because a lot of the effectiveness of allyship is just, what is everyone doing? One of the measures of effectiveness is, have I seen it somewhere before? We all know that if you're going to like make things better, you got to disrupt it, which means you're going to be doing shit people haven't seen before. And if they don't like it, the easiest way to deal with it and feel like they are empowered is to assume that you're doing this thing for one of these reasons, because all they can see is the shadow. You still have shadow even as you get higher. When people come to me in shadow work, they're like, great, so I'm going to clean up all this shadow and then I'm just going to have no more shadow. And I'm like, no, you're gonna have a new shadow that's crazier than anything you've ever seen before. And you're gonna be the only one at a certain altitude that can see it and deal with it in a chill way. You're gonna seem like Godzilla to people at a certain altitude as you keep getting larger, because your shadow's also gonna get larger. The next level of effective allyship is, how do you let that shadow show up for people and let it be effective enough to draw them up? Like, they'll know on the other side if the shadow is bad or good based on if their life was bad or good on the other side of encountering it. That takes a lot of time, and from a time magic standpoint, a lot of at-bats. You've met Petty Pendergrass, there's a very petty, angry gnome inside of me. I love him to death, but he will throw hands on a drop of a hat. He will die on any hill. And I was talking with a sweetie the other day, but I was like, this is too spicy for Twitter, but we're about almost an hour in. So anyone who gets to this part, you've earned this little hot take. The quickest way to find out if someone is masking is to punch them in the face and see if they flinch. If they don't flinch, they're masking. If they do, they're not. But now you got to apologize for punching them in the face. The only way to find out is to do something culturally pretty transgressive. Anyone at high enough level in that Kung Fu master will be like, good job, well done. Thank you for showing me the edge of my thing. Anyone who's not there is going to be like, why are you attacking me? And it's not to say that you should do that, but it's showing the trickiness of finding how authentic people are. Because if you get really good at masking, the only thing that shows what the mask is the one thing that challenges the mask. And so suddenly in your effectiveness at the highest level, you got to start doing some seemingly dastardly things. And so from that disappointment standpoint, from that energetic standpoint, how quickly, how fast, how integrity, and how in alignment can you do that? I'll say some crazy shit to people, and when they scan my energetic field, they'll know that it's a joke because they're not seeing hostility coming off of me, they're seeing mirth. It still hits just as hard, but they're like, okay, this is some clown shit versus someone's trying to destroy me shit, and they can take the hit a little bit better. Honestly, that's the kind of thing that happens in friendship. We razz our friends all the time. I was talking to people the other day, I had a friend who was dealing with, this isn't dating, they're dealing with an unflushable, someone who was constantly bothering them, even though they already told them, I don't want to date you. And this person had been socialized femme. And so I was asking them, just like, well, yeah, you've told them that they want to date you, but they're still there. Clearly they haven't faced a consequence. And they were like, well, if I make them face a consequence, that'll be mean. I'm like, it's mean that they're talking to you when you don't want to talk to them. You're going to have to do something that feels very crazy and unconscionable to you so that they can experience the thing they need to experience to know to be gone. And more than anything, it's mean to yourself to let people take your energy like that when you want to spend it on other folk. And that's a crisis. There's no way to do that right, because that level of awareness, self-awareness, and boundaries has already surpassed the cultural norm by like 2 orders of magnitude. No one's going to give you a high five for that. If anyone hears about that mean thing you did to that man who was bothering you, they're going to side on him because he's going to have a more sympathetic story. The question is, again, at a very specific altitude that you do not need to go to be effective. This is key lesson here, is that there is an effectiveness at every single level. You just need to know where your level is and hold to it. But there is a space where the thing that is effective, it's the cruel to be kind cliche. It's why that exists. Like, there's certain points where it's just like, you're going to have to be seemingly monstrous, but over time, not. The best example I can give is that thing in Lord of the Rings, when Gandalf is like, he gets very stern and scary. To tell him what time it was, to tell him what the truth of the situation was, to hold the integrity, and then sacrifice himself for the whole squad. When we read that character, we don't see, oh, Gandalf was mean once, and so he's mean forever. It's, no, Gandalf needed to use a thing called meanness to be kind to their friend Bilbo to get the work done. And at effective allyship, you only get to know if that worked over time. In the moment, it still might feel crazy. You might be very incredible. I was reading Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, and there's a line that Dumbledore says. They send a ministry aura after Dumbledore, and the way he describes it is the first time I've ever been able to really appreciate how snarky Dumbledore is. He's like, I regrettably had to jinx him. It was like, I had business to do. They sent a tail on me. I jinxed the hell of that guy, but I felt very bad about it. And I was like, damn, it do be like that. It's like, to maintain the integrity of the mission, I have to do something that's going to seem locally to this person that they're not about. But you take responsibility for it, you feel the remorse, and you metabolize it in your emotional body bigness. and you get stepping, you keep moving.
I am pretty much at capacity and need to go to a meeting. Should we
Perfect.
do we want to do an outro or an ending?
Let's do an outro ending. Let's do final thoughts. Here's what I want to know from you. I want a distillation. This is your chance to speak to my audience and be like, hey, how do you be a more effective ally?
What? That's your job.
I know it's my job, and I'm outsourcing it to you because they'll listen to you in ways that they won't listen to me. You've got embodied experiences I don't.
Okay.
The one thing that you learned that if you had started when you were 15 would get you to where you are much faster.
I mean, it feels almost silly to say because it's like it's the thing. It's maybe the language that I would use to describe superpower, like find your superpower. If you want to be effective, focus more on, you know, cleaning up and growing up the skills that you already have, the characteristics, the attributes, the passions that you already have, versus like trying to gain stuff that you don't have. Like, that's not to say that like gaining new skills or new abilities isn't cool or great or useful, but like if I could have understood earlier that the person I already was could like wake up, grow up, clean up, show up, and like be the person who I dreamed of being, like in and for the world, then like I could have saved myself a lot of pain and frustration and years of ineffectiveness while I was like, just I'll be able to do it when I'm a different person, not the one I am right now, you know? And yeah.
I feel good about pushing you to tell that because that was fucking bars. You gotta be cruel to be kind, babies.
But it feels good. Like also there was the joy for me, right? There was the like, does it feel good enough to be sustainable? Like I can tell you, feeling like I like myself versus I hate myself, yeah, feels good enough to be sustainable. You know, it does.
Well, that's amazing. I think we can leave there. If you want to follow Sonya, is there any way that people can sort of connect with you? I think it's just a Googling at this point, Minneapolis School Board. You'll find.
Yeah, you can Google my name, Sonya Emerick, SonyaEmerick. You'll find media and stuff about me. I also do blog on Facebook under Neuromess, one word, and write a lot of stuff there about parenting my autistic kid, AAC, which is alternative and augmentative communication, neurodiversity, liberation. So that's really where I get to be the most free in my writing.
Heck yeah. So if you want to keep following Sonya's journey, go to those places. If you want to be a more effective ally, hit me up. But you can also hit Sonya up. I cannot stress enough, this is, I know you're not supposed to take credit for people's accomplishments, but they are one of my most effective students. They're one of the most effective allies that I know. It feels very weird and nepotistic to say, but I don't give a shit. It's true. And so this is someone that you follow yourself after if you're truly trying to figure out what's possible.
The practices that I learned from dojo and from coaching with you, I really like have had such a tremendous part in shaping how I've decided to move into this work and why it feels so great and is so effective and why I've been able to like pull so many folks in, which is like a super important part of it for me. So thank you.
And as always, not always, but every time I remember, I'm going to do the Bob Barker thing and say, all right, everyone, go home and spay and neuter your pets. That's the end of the show.
Bye.